This is the coming revolution in higher consciousness. Listen now to Elizabeth Clare Prophet, educator, author, and authority on the most exciting story of our time, the coming revolution in higher consciousness.
Astrology is an accurate science showing the interplay of karmic forces. You are born with what is called a natal chart. It is a photograph of the heavens at the precise moment of your birth, and it shows the hand that God has dealt you for this life, the great momentums of your positive good descending from that causal body, and an assignment to balance certain karma with certain people that you are destined to meet in a certain profession and a certain service on one of the 7 rays. I've given you the teaching on those 7 rays in the book entitled Lords of the 7 Rays, where these ascended masters come and give to us the training for the balancing of the 7 spiritual centers. Karma, then, is something that we can deal with. It is designed by the highest intelligences who are the emissaries of God, who watch over us and care for us. We can all deal with our karmic lot if we determine to do so and do not rebel against the great law of God, nor against his person, nor against ourselves. If we see what we have as something we have got ourselves into, and that with God it is possible to get out of it lawfully, by transmutation and service and love, we will see how even the most painful experiences can be transcended. One thing we have to understand about astrology: it is not final, it is not predestination, it is not a fate that is fixed. It is simply a mathematical formula that tells you what is likely to occur, what will occur unless you bring some X factor to bear in that formula. And that X factor is the grace of God, the violet flame, your good works, your astuteness and your diligence to not be caught in the traps of karma. Karma is a trap. There is no 2 ways about it. And on the points of karma that we usually have a blind spot, a spiritual blindness. We can always talk to other people about the messes they get themselves into, but when it comes to ourselves, we simply don't see it till after the fact. Karma, then, can be defeated. We can defeat the fates by light. Do not think that it is inevitable. However, I would tell you that for the masses of mankind and many people in the world, they outpicture their karma to the T. You can predict what they will do century after century, and they follow it. Because they have not developed a Christhood, they are the creatures of their karma and their astrology. The astrology that I'm giving you now is moving onward toward the physical, and that is why we have to be concerned in these final years of the decade of the 80s. We begin with the truth of world karma, that in the next few years, the entire planet will face an ascending series of karmic challenges which are outlined in these coming astrological configurations. In February of 1988, there will be a major conjunction of 4 planets in Capricorn: Mars, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Now, when we see that configuration and what it portends, the call we make is to our I Am Presence and to the Divine Mother, whose name is Astrea, in her office of using a circle of blue flame and a sword of blue flame. And we actually call for those planets to be encircled and their negative momentums that they will deposit and deliver upon the earth to be bound. This is the call we make when dealing with astrology. You can make it on your personal chart, planetary charts, the chart of the nations, specifically the charts of the United States and of the Soviet Union. Now these planets conjoined will mark the formal starting point of a period of upheaval and change on the planet. Change can be positive and change can be negative. You can stand apart from this wave of karma and determine what it will be in your own life. There is one thing over which you have control, and that is you. You can't be in control of anyone else in this world, but you can be in control of yourself. You can decide today that you are going to win in this life. You are going to reunite with God in the ascension. And from this day forward, you will reap karma by balancing it, not by suffering under it. This is a time when the era of financial expansion related to oil and international finance will come to a halt. And with the exception of one last brief expansionary period, national economies will contract. This is a time when nations will become conservative and reactionary. There will be massive debt liquidation. Debt liquidation, what is that a sign of? People not willing to bear their karma. People rebelling and saying, I won't bear my karma. I won't be accountable. Let someone else bear it. The real price of commodities will fall as they have already since Neptune entered Capricorn in 1984. A pessimistic mood will sweep the earth, but you will stand apart in a pillar of fire. That is my prophecy to you, light bearers of the Twin Cities, of America and the world. It's my prophecy to you, keepers of the flame. But you must become a self-fulfilling prophecy, not stand back and watch things happening to yourself or watch yourself doing things that you don't particularly like. You decide. You decide that you are going to be apart from that downtrend, from that avalanche, if it be, of negativity. And when you make the decision, you take a measuring rod and you measure, and you establish a co-measurement, and you say in yourself, planetary karma is due. What is the quotient of light that I need in my aura to be sealed from it? God will tell you, your Holy Christ self will tell you, and you will set about giving daily decrees to bank the light in your aura and in your chakras. You will guard your harmony so that you do not squander that light and lose it in a moment of fit of anger or depression. And you will be prepared in the day when all around you, people's hearts may fail them for fear. You know, it's difficult for people in their everyday affairs, and even more difficult for nations, to integrate the opposing influences of these planets. Let's consider what these 4 planets are bringing as vibration. Saturn rules institutions, the state, legal systems, and authority. Saturn tends to limit freedom. Uranus, on the other hand, governs revolution, economic and political change, innovation, aspects of warfare, civil unrest, strikes, and the breakdown of authority, and it gives impulse to freedom. Neptune rules enlightenment, spiritual inspiration and intuition, drugs, subversion, disillusionment, treachery, and scandal, and gives the impulse for illumination. Mars, although it is only part of the conjunction for a matter of days, gives the entire configuration a warlike character. The period of time between 1988 and 1992 will be a time of karmic summing up. Right through December 1992. During this period, we are likely to see the karma of persons and nations manifest, the reform, disruption, or dissolution of economic and political systems. We're likely to see revolution, major cataclysm, and war. February 1988 to December 1992. It is a period of time when, for the sake of God, raise up the light daily through your dynamic decrees. We are so prone to think that the sun also rises. Things feel wonderful, we go about, we're happy, we're free, we're enjoying our lives. This is the karma of the age. It is prophesied in astrology and by Mother Mary. These things will come when we least expect them, and when it is too late to do anything about them. This is the time to make your transition to a higher spiritual body that is concentric with your physical body, to raise the very vibrations of your molecules so that you can receive the new light of Aquarius and not be pulled down by the ending of the karma of Pisces. In this period, the United States and the Soviet Union will both experience the intensity of this configuration, particularly between December 1988 and December 1990. At this time, Pluto will transit between 14 degrees and 18 degrees Scorpio, conjoined the Soviet Union's sun and opposed to the United States' sun. This is a time when war is most likely to break out between the superpowers. In addition to the configurations I have presented thus far, there are others which I'm about to present that make economic catastrophe and war a very real threat. But even if the United States and the Soviet Union do not go to war, they will have to deal with a mortal challenge to their nations, their leadership, and their forms of government. Roger Bacon, who lived in the 13th century as the greatest of its scientific minds, who was an incarnation of Saint Germain, said that it is possible to avoid wars through the study of astrology. He said that if the leaders of the church had read the astrological warnings, such as the comet of 1264, which preceded the battles that broke out all over Europe, then the wars might have been averted. In his Opus Majus, he wrote, "Oh, how great an advantage might have been secured to the Church of God if the characteristics of the heavens in those times had been discerned beforehand by scientists and understood by prelates and princes, and transferred to a zeal for peace, for so great a slaughter of Christians would not have occurred." Today, we are called to the science of the spoken word as alchemists for this universal transmutation. I'd like to give you an example of the prophecy of astrology in a situation I noted about 2 years ago. Recognizing that there was a good possibility that the United States would be involved in an international military confrontation at sea in the middle of May 1987. The peak date of the several-week cycle of military conflict was May 14th, the day when Mars, transiting in Gemini, made a direct opposition to Uranus in Sagittarius, and a slightly wider orbed opposition to Saturn. This opposition fell on Mars in the chart of the conception of the United States in the 7th house of warfare and open enemies. Given these influences, the odds of a military confrontation were very high. The USS Stark, operating in the Persian Gulf near Bahrain, was attacked by Iraq 3 days later, and 37 sailors were killed. Since mid-September, the United States has been subject to planetary influences similar to the configuration which triggered the Stark incident, as transiting Mars formed a conjunction to the U.S.-Neptune square to the U.S.-Mars conjoined transiting Uranus and Saturn in the 7th house of open enemies and warfare. You can begin to see in the heavens the movement of planets in the establishment of sectors called houses, and you can see how their movement, always the movement, affecting change and releasing a certain energy. Now, this configuration is an even stronger indication of military action and a calamitous event than the configuration that triggered the Stark incident. In the past month, there have been a series of incidents in the Middle East, including the sinking of an Iranian mine layer and several Iranian gunboats by U.S. forces, and Iran's Silkworm missile attacks on U.S.-owned or protected oil tankers in Kuwaiti waters. All this is written in the heavens. All this can be mitigated. I believe that the events connected with the Stark were mitigated. 2 missiles were fired, only 1 went off. There were miracles involved, but the karma that the nation has to face in war and in neglect must come upon us. We have to learn the lessons. We have to see what our leaders are doing and how they are misrepresenting us, how their policies are not properly calculated to save life and to deliver us in a very, very difficult situation. The people have to wake up, and therefore God allows a certain amount of karma to descend and a certain amount to be transmuted. As you know, in response to the recent actions of Iran, diplomats and government officials said that if the United States did not retaliate against Iran, it would lose what little credibility it still retained in the region. At first, it was questionable whether or not the U.S. would take military action or merely respond with words. On October 19th, the United States Navy attacked 2 Iranian oil platforms in the Persian Gulf, which had been used to launch raids on Gulf shipping. One was shelled by 4 U.S. destroyers and demolished. The other, which had been outfitted with radar equipment, was boarded and destroyed with explosives. The administration termed this an adequate measured response and said that U.S. military action in the Persian Gulf was a closed book unless Iran retaliated. Iran vowed to deliver a crushing blow in retaliation and said the United States had admired itself in a full-scale war. This admiring of ourselves is quite a precise word karmically. The entangling of ourselves with these individuals, Iranians, in the Iran-Contra affair and in previous situations with Iran, has made us be tied to a tremendous hate-mongering campaign by the Khomeini of death to the great Satan, America. This entanglement is a karmic entanglement, and how we extricate ourselves depends upon how we employ light, even in the form of military action, to prevent that evil from proliferating and carrying out the threats that it has declared. Some diplomats were disappointed by the modest response on our part. They believe that Iran will interpret the U.S. attack as an irritant and not be deterred from further military action. We are not finished with the triggering of astrology of our encounters at sea, and we will continue to see that coming to the surface. Now, how the trends outlined in the February 1988 Capricorn conjunction and Pluto's transit of Scorpio affect each individual or nation depends on how these planets or other astrological indicators aspect their natal charts. There are 3 major cycles based on the relationship of the 5 outer planets to each other, which correspond to positive periods of harmony, growth, optimism, and peace. And there are negative periods of destabilization, disruption, and decay. A negative period in these cycles occurred between 1910 through 1919. The most intense phase of the cycle began in 1914 at the start of World War I. In an almost identical manner, these cyclic indices hit their most negative period in 1940 at the start of World War II. Negative cycles also coincided with the Korean and Vietnamese wars. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, these indices will be in the depths of their negative cycle, indicating conflict of the magnitude of the past world wars. On August 24, 1987, there was the tightest conjunction in more than 100 years when 5 planets, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, were all located between 0 and 4 degrees Virgo. Astroeconomist Arch Crawford used this conjunction to predict ahead of time the date the stock market would reach its top and begin a horrendous decline. August 25th, the day after the conjunction, the Dow Jones averages topped out at 2732 and started down, setting the stage for the record drops of this past October, including the 508-point drop on Black Monday, October 19th. The decline since August 25th is only the first leg of the market's descent. The second leg is related to the major 1988 Capricorn conjunction, which I've mentioned, and the recent eclipse of the Sun. This eclipse occurred September 22nd at 29 degrees Virgo, or as some astrologers choose to designate it, at 0 degrees Libra. This eclipse of the Sun is destined to influence the economy, the government, and the course of peace and war on the planet. The spiritual meaning of the eclipse of the Sun is the eclipse of the I Am Presence, which is called the dark night of the Spirit, when the Spirit of the living God seems totally absent from us. We feel bereft and alone, as though God has deserted us. That is because of the great weight of the karma we are dealing with, as well as of the initiation with which Jesus Christ faced when he was on the cross. There comes a time when, for all the light God has given us, we are expected to maintain and hold the balance by the light in our temple in time of crisis. In other words, the goal of personal Christhood is for the light to be so full in the temple that the I Am Presence can be momentarily set aside from us or withdrawn, and we will still survive. Now when Jesus said on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" he had the sense of this great I Am Presence being cut off from him so that he could pass through the initiation of the resurrection and the life based solely on the light that he had stored in his temple and in his chakras. It is a very sudden and painful sense to be separated from that I Am Presence, and it comes as a shock. Jesus knew that was the initiation of the cross, but nevertheless, one cries out because one has always lived under the shadow of the Almighty. The eclipse of the moon is the eclipse that is called the dark night of the soul. That is the eclipsing of the soul by a heavy weight of karma. A period of very heavy karma makes us feel profoundly burdened in our souls. We know not what way to turn. We feel that our friends, our government, our church, everyone has failed us. And here we are all alone, facing this major crisis in our lives. The eclipse of the sun, then, is an eclipse of the God identity. And if we don't have that firmly focused in us, we have a time of great burden. So this eclipse is destined to influence our economy, our government, and the course of peace and war, not only for America, but throughout the planet. 29 degrees Virgo falls within 2 degrees of the midheaven of the U.S. conceptual chart. I'll explain what I mean by that. Most astrologers use July 4th, 1776 as the birth date of the United States. I count that date as the date of our conception, our Declaration of Independence, which is exactly and precisely what happens when there is the conception of anything, including ourselves. The moment we are conceived, we are an identity apart from father and mother, having a unique fusion of genes, a unique blood type, a unique plotting of our karma and our life stream. That moment of conception is the day we say, I am who I am. And we move forth from that to individualize the God flame. Everyone and every idea, every business, every system, every invention, every nation and city has a date of conception and a date of birth. I use April 30th, 1789 as the birth date of our nation. This is the date of the inauguration of George Washington as the nation's first president. But this is the date that there emerges a profile of the pattern of Christhood in this nation, a profile of a president. No one had ever seen one before. What was the identity of the American people going to be as personified in this president? Using these two dates, then, I am coming up with the astrology that I'm giving to you. I'm using November 7th, 1917, the dates that the Soviets successfully seized power, as the birth date of the USSR. Getting back to that astrology then, in the astrology of nations, eclipses often show a loss of power, a death, or a disaster. An eclipse of the moon conjoined Pluto triggered the Chernobyl disaster. This astrological event and its portent, noted in Revelation and Nostradamus, I have set forth in my work, Saint Germain on Prophecy, Book 2, Nostradamus, the Four Horsemen. Now you can see how the Chernobyl disaster is a dark night of the soul for many, not only the Soviets, but also the European nations and all who were affected by this substance. Pluto, which configured in this accident, is often associated with death and destruction. I am commenting in my book that there was no intercessor to stand between the people and the descent of this wormwood, which is what the meaning in Ukrainian is of Chernobyl. The area is named Wormwood after an herb by that name which grows plentifully there, which also corresponds with an angel who falls, called Wormwood. Many of the people in Russia today are embracing the idea that Chernobyl was prophesied in Scripture. Without the intercessor, karma falls precisely according to astrological formulas. Take the assassination of John Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. This was preceded by a total solar eclipse earlier that year. This eclipse exactly conjoined his natal Saturn at 27 degrees Cancer in his 10th house, opposed to the U.S. conceptional Pluto, 29 degrees Capricorn. It occurred in his life because he had a vulnerability, a karmic vulnerability in his natal chart, and because it had something to do with the nation America, and he is the figurehead. These two coming together, the natal chart and the national chart, and the event takes place. So a solar eclipse falling on the U.S. midheaven at a time when the nation is headed into progressively more difficult circumstances does not augur well. It could be extremely detrimental to the nation's public standing and institutions, including the Congress, the office of the President, and especially Ronald Reagan. If played out to its extreme, it could lead to the fall of the government, the death of our form of government, the fall or death of the president, literally or figuratively, and the onset of a major economic catastrophe. The arc of the zodiac between 29 degrees Virgo and 9 degrees Libra is extremely important to the United States. Between October 28, 1980 and mid-September 1981, Jupiter and Saturn were closely conjoined in the early degrees of Libra. The conjunction first formed when Jupiter was at 0 degrees Libra and Saturn was at 4 degrees Libra, just 2 degrees from the U.S. conceptional midheaven at 1 degree Libra. Subsequently, Jupiter and Saturn made nearly exact contact at 2, 3, and 6 degrees Libra. On December 30th, 1980, they made an exact conjunction at 9 degrees Libra. Thus, the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn commenced within 1 degree of both the U.S. midheaven and the recent eclipse. This conjunction occurs every 20 years, and it had been anticipated by astrologers because it has coincided with the death of an American president, usually by assassination, since 1840. Harrison, Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, Harding, Roosevelt, and Kennedy all were afflicted by that 20-year cycle. As you know, Ronald Reagan was shot but not killed by John Hinckley on March 30th, 1981. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions occur in one element for roughly a 240-year period. The current cycle, which began with a conjunction in Capricorn on January 26, 1942, is in Earth signs. The 1980-81 conjunction occurring in the early degrees of Libra was an exception to this general pattern. As a result, some astrologers speculated that perhaps the president would not die in office. It is my conviction that he survived the attempted assassination because of specific invocations made by keepers of the flame to mitigate the effect of the conjunction. Anticipating this, we gathered for a weekend prayer vigil on that configuration. Not only for that, but to break the curse placed on the presidents of the United States by Chief Tecumseh. I wish I could tell you that that incident was the end of the matter, but it wasn't. Major configurations can activate a point in the zodiac which is sensitive for years to come. The planets move on to other positions, but leave what Saint Germain calls a ghost that can be activated by future astrological events. The ghost of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction will influence and be influenced by later events in a chain reaction, like pool balls caromming geometrically on a pool table. With the solar eclipse of September 22nd, 1987, there is a planetary revisiting of the sensitive degree where the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction took place. This catalyzes and brings to completion the unmanifest energies of the conjunction. In addition, transiting Neptune at 5 degrees Capricorn made a square to the eclipse and U.S. midheaven. This indicates that things are not what they seem, and that the potential for treachery and intrigue is exceptionally high. This is precisely the words of Mother Mary, that the great war will come when people least expect it. America is asleep today in many ways. There are those who listen to the imploring of the soul to seek and know truth, and there are others who drown out the soul in a pleasure cult, in noise, in seeking one gratification after another, or a success cult. They don't want to hear that soul that is crying out from within to be delivered, that urges us on to find the keys to our victory. This eclipse of September 22nd puts every aspect of our nation at risk. That means that we're not prepared in those particular degrees of our karma to be without the intercession of the Sun and of the entire spirit of the Great White Brotherhood. We have not embraced Saint Germain and his teachings while we had the opportunity to do so. And therefore we are vulnerable to this configuration. Libra is the sign on our midheaven, and it rules war. It is also associated with intrigue. We could see the second phase of the assassination attempt on the president, but in another form, as an attack on or the subversion of the office of the president or the Constitution itself. There are a number of ways it can manifest. The first effects started to become noticeable around October 8, 1987, when the sun made its conjunction with the U.S. conceptual, Saturn, and President Reagan and the nation lost prestige due to the administration's inability to carry out a credible policy in the Persian Gulf. The stock market crash, the rejection of Judge Bork as a candidate for the Supreme Court, and the Soviet rejection and then belated acceptance of a summit conference. These are only the first of a series of effects that are likely to unfold over the next 6 months to 2 years, unless a mighty voice of a people, the voice of a multitude, is raised up in giving those dynamic decrees to call forth the light. The conjunction of Saturn, Uranus, Mars, and Neptune in the early degrees of Capricorn this coming February 1988 will square the U.S. midheaven at 1 degree Libra and the eclipse point at 29 degrees Virgo, and trigger the second leg of the stock market crash of October 1987. The Saturn-Uranus conjunction at 0 degrees Capricorn, which occurs as part of the larger conjunction, is particularly important. It makes a very tight square to the U.S. midheaven and the ghost of the eclipse. A Saturn-Uranus conjunction can trigger major upheaval in the political, social, and economic affairs of the nations, even without any of the complicating and amplifying factors that are involved in this configuration. Once the market starts down on the second leg, the big drop in the market is likely to come around November 13th, 1989. November 13th, 1989, when Saturn makes its exact conjunction to Neptune at 10 degrees Capricorn, and both make an exact opposition to Jupiter at 10 degrees Cancer. This opposition will affect much more than the stock market. It will be a critical factor in triggering major debt liquidation and could lead to the dissolution of much of the Western banking system. It could precipitate an economic crisis so severe as to lead to the dissolution of the United States government or provoke revolution. In the period around November 13th, 1989, transiting Mars will be only 2 weeks away from making its exact conjunction to Pluto at 15 degrees Scorpio on November 27th, 1989, one of the peak dates for the start of war between the United States and the Soviet Union. War and economic catastrophe are interrelated. Economic conditions are one of the most reliable indicators of war. The configurations we are discussing show how these two social phenomena are likely to act in the near future. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is likely to trigger the economic downturn, is related to the growth and development of socialism and communism. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction of 1846 was followed by the publication of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx in 1847. As the Saturn-Neptune cycle developed, it coincided with the establishment and growth of the main European socialist parties. The next two conjunctions of Saturn and Neptune coincided with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, Stalin's death in 1953, and Soviet expansion into the Third World. At the square of the two planets in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and became embroiled in the Polish crisis. In sum, major Neptune-Saturn cycles have coincided with periods of Soviet expansion and aggression. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction of 1988-1989 will mark a crucial turning point in Soviet communist development and thus world history. But as we have seen in the late 1980s, this conjunction projects the triggering of international economic turmoil, which shows that during this cycle, Soviet aggression and Western economic chaos are interrelated. How they are interrelated can best be seen through the astrology of the summit meeting called to sign the INF Treaty, which is related to 2 points in the zodiac central to our discussion of war and economic catastrophe: 29 degrees Virgo and the 10th through 20th degrees of Scorpio. The Reagan-Gorbachev summit has been set for December 7th, 1987. Even without being an astrologer, you can know that that is a very inauspicious time for the event. The 46th anniversary of Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. President Reagan said he hoped this event would be superseded by the day that we begin the path to peace and safety in the world through disarmament. That hope is almost certain to be illusory, perhaps fatally so. The chart for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, has the progressed U.S. Mars, the planet of war, conjoined transiting Neptune, the planet of illusion, intrigue, and plots, at 29 degrees Virgo, the precise degree of the recent solar eclipse. The Mars-Neptune conjunction was the principal significator of the Japanese sneak attack. Thus, the recent solar eclipse at 29 Virgo, which puts the U.S. government and economy in such a perilous position, not only activated the ghost of the 20-year cycle of the Jupiter-Saturn connection in Libra, which threatens the life of the president of the government, but it also activated the ghost of Pearl Harbor. Any treaty negotiated or signed under this influence will carry the ghost or residual influence of a sneak attack. The point at 29 degrees Virgo, 0 degrees Libra, the September 22nd solar eclipse, will also be activated by the square of Mars, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune conjoined in Capricorn, with their wide range of economic, social, and military influences. In sum, the summit to sign the INF Treaty promises to be one of the most important integrating and triggering events prior to the period of extreme economic and military tensions that commences in February of 1988. In light of the relation between economic activity and war, it is interesting to note that John Cena, former chief of the Czechoslovakian Defense Council, highest ranking military figure to ever defect from the Soviet Union, said that Gorbachev initially refused to come to a summit due to the behavior of the U.S. economy. We have just spoken to John Cena in Washington, and this is what he said. Soviet military strategy is to launch a preemptive first strike against the United States if and when the economy falls apart. Cena believes that Gorbachev initially refused to accept Reagan's offer to come to the United States because he was waiting to see if the U.S. economy would collapse. When the economy failed to collapse, Gorbachev agreed to the summit. Proponents of the INF Treaty argue that the world will be made a safer place to live in, since it will eliminate a class of nuclear weapons and reduce the number of warheads in Europe. I'm going to discuss that theory a little later in our Projecting the Cycles of Karma and the Interpretations of Nostradamus. Getting back to a focus on this astrology, we will note that successful peace treaties are usually concluded when there are harmonious contacts between Jupiter and Venus and the Sun. On December 7th of this year, Venus will form a conjunction to Neptune in Capricorn and square to Jupiter in Aries, a configuration whose influence is characterized by intrigue, deception, and self-deception, nothing that would be likely to make the world a safer place in which to live. There are really no positive Venus-Jupiter aspects in the US or Soviet charts at this time. There is, however, an extremely ominous aspect which comes to fruition December 11th, 1987, several days after the summit conference is scheduled to adjourn. For a 2-week period, peaking December 11th and 12th, transiting Mars will form a conjunction to transiting Pluto at 11 degrees Scorpio. Just remember Scorpio. It's either the scorpion sting of death, especially when Pluto and Mars are involved, or it is the higher-minded life streams, those of highest attainment, who raise up the light, focusing it through the all-seeing eye of God to defeat death and bring about that everlasting life. Now we have a very major challenge in Scorpio because this is the generation that is intended to place the capstone on the pyramid. If you look at that dollar bill, you see the all-seeing eye of God in the capstone. The capstone needs to be put in place, which means the light of a people and a nation must be raised up to the point of the third eye, because each one of us is a pyramid. Each one of us is building our pyramid of life. And we master the cycles of our life from the base chakra to the crown. This greatest moment of our history is clouded and burdened by many, many influences that tear down the light, that tear the chakras, and that do not allow a nation, therefore, to have the vision to defeat death and hell. And as you know, the name of the pale horse, the fourth horseman, is death, and hell follows after him. The only way they can be defeated is by the light raised up. This is an analysis of this configuration. Mars and Pluto form a conjunction to the Soviet Union's natal sun at 14 degrees Scorpio and an opposition to the United States' natal sun at 10 degrees Taurus. This conjunction will tend to bring international tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union into sharp focus. The fact that we are signing a peace treaty at this time shows that the goal of one or both of the signatories is anything but peace. Mars rules aggression, war, and the threat of war. It is also related to explosions, riots, rebellion, and terrorism. Pluto, which rules death, indicates a life and death power struggle and poses a potentially mortal challenge to the leadership and national identity of both nations. Pluto also rules nuclear power, terrorism, blackmail, secret deals, spying, and anything involving mass death and destruction. It is difficult to predict the precise outcome of this configuration, but there are a number of likely effects. On these effects, karma, by causes set in motion, we must direct the full forces of Archangel Michael and his legions. We must call to the faithful and true and the armies in heaven who figure and configure in the book of Revelation. These are the forces of light that defeat the fates in answer to our call. The appearance of these effects may take some time to manifest, but this is what we can see. The use of nuclear blackmail in order to gain an overwhelming diplomatic advantage. A major sellout by one or both governments. A direct military confrontation. A major terrorist incident. Significant domestic difficulties such as rioting in either or both nations. A nuclear accident like Chernobyl. Since the sun will be transiting in Sagittarius, conjoined Saturn and Uranus, and making its opposition to the United States' Mars, the United States, as a result of actions taken during this period, could become involved in a general war with the Soviets or become involved in a separate military incident with another nation. Much of what happens at the summit depends on the behavior of Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev's chart is a study in contradictions. He is a Pisces with a Neptune opposition to his sun and a Leo moon trine to Uranus in Aries in his 10th house. This combination of planets gives him the ability to create and sustain an image and a great deal of charisma, an ideal planetary pattern for promoting glasnost. The Sun-Neptune opposition reveals that glasnost is an illusion. Gorbachev's other side is revealed by an extended T-square, his natal Jupiter and Pluto in Cancer in his 12th house of secret activities, conjoined his Cancer ascendant and Mars in Cancer in the 1st house, oppose his Saturn in Capricorn in the 6th and Venus in Capricorn in the 7th, all of which square his natal Uranus in Aries in the 10th. This configuration shows Gorbachev to be a relentlessly ambitious man driven by an obsessive need for power. He is secretive, ruthless, callous, and willing to manipulate without thought or feeling. He will never forget his past struggles and will always be surrounded by those who will attempt to take his power, a circumstance which will make him all the more ruthless. He has the capacity to be cruel, treacherous, resentful. His is the psychological, or astrological, if you will, type that is capable of going to war, using nuclear weapons deliberately. If you have any doubt about that, I suggest you get a pocketbook that is a current bestseller, Behind the High Kremlin Walls, and read it from cover to cover. And then you will think twice about doubting what I have just said, if you have any doubts. Gorbachev is either psychic or he uses psychic and occult powers to gain or maintain power. Mars and Pluto transiting in Scorpio will be conjoined the Soviet sun and trine his natal sun during the summit, which will put him in a very powerful position. Gorbachev, however, has extreme pressure on him from ever-present enemies in the Soviet Union and from social and economic pressure in his country. No astrological or economic indicator shows that the Soviet economy is likely to improve, and the Mars-Pluto conjunction square his natal moon in Leo shows that Gorbachev fears the Soviet people and the loss of status. Thus, he is negotiating to gain the upper hand because he knows that his survival depends on it. Should he succeed, our survival will be endangered. In fact, our survival is precarious whether he wins or loses, due to the intense and redundant nature of the astrological configurations we have been discussing. By contrast, Ronald Reagan's chart is not nearly as strong at this time. He is already influenced and burdened by the solar eclipse, the square of the Capricorn conjunction to the US midheaven, and the reactivation of that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 1980. His own chart shows a lot of pressure, particularly from transiting Saturn and Uranus in Sagittarius, opposed to Reagan's natal Pluto in Gemini. With all other considerations factored in, these transits have the potential to be fatal. In any case, Reagan is in a weaker position than Gorbachev as they come to that summit conference. The charts of Secretary of State George Shultz and Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze, the primary negotiators of the INF Treaty, both show a great deal of deception and intrigue. There are many other configurations in the charts of the US and USSR, Reagan and Gorbachev, and all those surrounding them that reinforce the general picture of what we can expect in the next 5 years along the lines of what we've been discussing. Many nations, including Great Britain, West Germany, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and France, will also have extreme challenges during this period. This cycle of danger is concurrent with a cycle of great opportunity. During the dangerous period between 1988 and 1992, Pluto will be orbiting the Sun inside the orbit of Neptune, something that happens only once every 248 years. This cycle has coincided with epochal events, including the birth of Jesus Christ, the baptism of Clovis into the Christian Church, the discovery of the United States of America. The Uranus-Neptune conjunction, which happens only once in every 172 years, is also associated with new phases of history which have a scientific and mystical character and can lead to greater freedom, innovation, and enlightenment. Beloved friends of light, this handwriting is on the wall. The choice is ours. Thank you.
You've been watching The Coming Revolution in Higher Consciousness with Elizabeth Clare Prophet. The preceding public access program has been presented through the assistance of Church Universal and Triumphant, Box A, Livingston, Montana, 59047, 1390. If you would like to know more, call this number or write this address.